Welcome to Norway. May the 17th, Norwegian Constitution Day. This is Oslo, but could the 1st of July, the anniversary of Scottish devolution, one day see parades like this in Edinburgh?
Well, Norway and Scotland have a lot of similarities, I think. They're both small countries, small populations, 4 or 5 million people. They're in the North Atlantic, quite weathered countries. Both have beautiful scenery. And, of course, they both have oil, or Scotland would have oil as an independent country.
The SNP has made much of the similarities between Scotland and Norway. But if the Scots decide to go their own way, could their newly independent country be as prosperous as their neighbours across the sea?
I think Scotland could be like Norway if it had the same luck as Norway's had, and if it made whatever choices would be the appropriate choices to make most of the resources and starting point that Scotland has. Whether that would happen is completely in the open.
Depending upon whom they listen to, Scots will believe they're either subsidised to the hilt or robbed blind. But there's more to the union than money. It's also a diplomatic, a military union. And the Scots seem to like the idea of the United Kingdom when it comes to defence and foreign affairs. General Sir Mike Jackson headed the British Army during the Iraq invasion. He argues that the army is a model for how Scots can celebrate their own identity and still be happy within the Union.
It is one army, but it's also, you can look at it almost as a collection of warlike tribes who come together for common purpose. And they come together with their own traditions, with their own ways. And that gives a great richness, which reflects the Union as a whole. I mean, armies at the end of the day are bound to reflect the societies whom they serve and from whom they recruit. I mean, they are part of that society. And that's no different in the British Army, with all its I say, little tribal differences here and there, which make it what it is. You don't find it really almost anywhere else, but that's our way.
The army gets the concept of devolution. Sir Mike has no problem with transferring more powers to Holyrood if that makes the Scots happy. But he has firm views as to where the line should be drawn.
It seems to me to be an entirely rational, sensible way, as I say, of balancing off a very natural desire of Scots to be largely masters of their own destiny, but equally well not taking undue risk with an uncertain world, and that whilst most things could, of course, be devolved and dealt with, as many already are over the last 10 years. We could go further, I accept that entirely. That's a matter of balance within the United Kingdom itself. When it comes to external matters as opposed to internal, defence, security, foreign policy, then Scotland is better within the wider construct of the United Kingdom.
Whether the general is right or wrong, Scotland withdrawing from the United Kingdom could have a major effect on Britain's foreign affairs. Colin Keating leads an influential United Nations think tank. He had a front-row seat as another union broke up in the 1990s. He thinks if Scotland were to withdraw from the United Kingdom, then Britain might follow the precedent set by the Soviets.
What happened there, of course, was that Russia inherited and became the successor state of the Soviet Union, and that meant it inherited the power of the Soviet Union, in particular the nuclear weapons of the Soviet Union, and the power of the Soviet Union in the United Nations. Because it was the successor state, it simply transferred the name from Soviet Union to Russia, and then Russia, in effect, took over all the assets and responsibilities of the former Soviet Union. And that meant that it was able to keep the veto in the Security Council.
So an independent Scotland takes her place in the UN between Saudi Arabia and Senegal, and London holds on to the Security Council place. But Tony Blair insists both would lose out in an uncertain and changing world.
mean, I see this more clearly now out of office than I do almost when I was in office. The world that we are going to be living through in the next 10, 20 years is going to change dramatically. I mean, America will be the most powerful nation for some time, but it's going to share that power. And there will be other centres of power, particularly China, India, in the years to come. And you look at the size of those countries, the UK as a country is not a big country anymore. So I think that if people really think about it and reflect on the way the world's changing, they'll think, yes, it's good that we here in Scotland have more control of the things that concern us, but when it comes to issues to do with foreign affairs or defence, major questions to do with our economic role in the world, then being part of the UK makes sense for Scotland and for England. And I just think that's the way the world is today.
So where does all this leave us? The choice for Scots remains independence versus the Union, but could that Union itself be about to change? The parties supporting the Union set up a commission to review devolution under Sir Kenneth Calman, a senior academic. Calman has just reported and says give the Scottish Parliament more powers, especially more control over income tax. Could this make Scots less likely to opt for independence? Depends how you frame the question.
Ask people whether or not they're simply for or against independence. You can find survey data that suggests that there are as many people in favour of independence as against. Ask them to choose between independence and the status quo, defined as having a Scottish Parliament. Support for independence tends to go down for a third. And then change it yet again and say to people, well, do you want independence, increased powers for the Edinburgh Parliament or the status quo? Then it is the increased powers for the Scottish Parliament that clearly emerges as the most popular option, and support for independence in some surveys falls to as low as a fifth. So I think certainly clearly an indication there that Scots want a strong, powerful Scottish Parliament, but whether or not that means independence or not depends very much on how the question is posed to them.
Nationalists say forget the polls, let the people decide. They're happy to hold a referendum pitting their policy of independence against the option of more powers for Scotland within devolution. They believe they'll sway the Scots and end the Union.
My reasons for this are quite simple. I mean, you've got to look at the passage of time and history and what people thought at various events. If you live through enormous change, it's sometimes difficult to stop and say, my goodness, how far we've travelled. I mean, just a few years ago, the idea of a Scottish Parliament, if not absurd, was at best unlikely. Well, the Parliament's here, it's built, we're in it, it's working, it's been working 10 years, it's celebrating its 10th birthday. Then the idea of having a Scottish National Party government in that Parliament, whether it was because their system was rigged against us or because it was just not going to happen. The idea of Labour losing an election for the first time in 50 years in Scotland, if not absurd, was at least unlikely. Now that's happened, they lost, the SNP won. So the idea of having a Scotland which was independent is neither absurd nor unlikely. I think it's inevitable and couldn't come sooner as far as I'm concerned.
Salmon's opponents reject a referendum as divisive and dangerous. The choice can't be sidestepped forever, though. Sooner or later, we will have to decide what will make the Scots happy.